Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our last Flyway nights of this run of 23-24. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from our own wildlife area manager, Garrett Spaan. Garrett is going to be sharing with us about the updates on the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. He's also going to be introducing himself since he is new to our area, and some of the work that he's done in the past, and some of how he is going to be managing this wildlife area. Also, got to throw a shout out to California Duck Days. Duck Days is right around the corner. We have it coming up Saturday, April 27th. If you're not familiar with the event, it is a family-focused nature festival with many different activities. Some of the activities we do with the school kids traditionally, like going in the pond and finding invertebrates or dissecting owl pellets, and others. We have arts and crafts going on. We'll have live animals, including some raptors, birds of prey, and the bats will be joining us. And there's also going to be many different exhibitors from other nonprofits and government agencies coming to do a variety of really cool stuff with us. And we'll also, hopefully, if the wildlife area is open and running, we will be out there doing some tours of the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area as well. So with that, I'm going to bring you over to Garrett, who is, where are you? There you are. Who's going to be sharing with us about the updates. Welcome, Garrett. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, awesome to be here. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right. Can you see that?
Yeah, we sure do. Thanks, Garrett.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here to introduce myself. And really the goal of this presentation is to really talk about the different habitat types here at Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area and how we manage those different habitat types throughout the year. So we'll talk about all those different types and the things that we're doing. I'll also give an update on some of the projects that we have going to construction this summer, some of the things that are going around on the wildlife area. First of all, just to introduce myself, my name is Garrett Spaan. I am the new wildlife area manager here at Yolo Bypass. I started back in October. Prior to that, I spent about 13 years working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Started my career in 2010 at the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge Complex as a visitor services assistant, doing an internship from college. That was about a 6-month long internship, doing a lot of environmental education and outdoor rec programming, habitat work, all different types of things like that. And then that moved into a position as a Youth Conservation Corp Crew Leader, leading high school students doing conservation and facility related projects around the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge Complex. From there, I transitioned into a seasonal tractor operator. I did that for a season on the Sacramento River National Wildlife Refuge and on the other wetland areas as part of that complex, which then moved me into a park ranger position. And I went back to graduate school while doing that. And as a park ranger, I was there doing a lot of that for the service for 6 years or so, and really doing a lot of the outdoor recreation on the SAC complex, auto tour routes, photography blinds, hunting programs, fishing, hiking trails. And it was an awesome experience working for a smaller agency like that gave me the opportunity to be heavily involved in the habitat management on that complex, which was very diverse in the different habitat types that they managed, and gained a lot of experience in my time doing that. That position led me into a private lands biologist, and I did that same location, working out of the SAC refuge complex, but not working on the refuges that were fee title as part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I was actually primarily working with private landowners around the Sacramento Valley, doing habitat restoration and enhancement work. The goal of that really being to expand that conservation footprint outside of refuge lands. And in that position, I learned a lot of different skills. I was able to conduct topographic surveys, design wetland enhancements, riparian restorations, native grass plantings, a whole slew of different types of projects. So I got to take the things that I've learned in managing habitat, and then also work with private landowners to write management plans and develop projects that could enhance habitat. Once I saw this opportunity, I applied for it and was luckily offered the job, and I'm very happy to be here and excited to get to spend some time on the wildlife area and just really get to look at this incredible place and the incredible habitat types that are out here, and the wildlife and all the people, and it's just a really awesome place to be. So I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to everything that we're going to be able to accomplish in the future. So first off, just some general overview for YOLO. So for folks that haven't seen this before, Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area is part of the Bay Delta region, in Region 3, right here on the map. That's the region we're in, and that's where we work out of. Grizzly Island, Napa-Sonoma Marsh are some other major wildlife areas that are in that region that have called staff lands. So just a quick overview on the wildlife area. It was designated as a wildlife area in 1994, opened to the public in 1997. Started as a smaller wildlife area, just over 3,000 acres, acquired quite a bit more land over the years. It's now sitting right around 16,700 acres, about 22 square miles. Primary habitat types being wetlands, uplands, agricultural lands, and riparian habitat. The wildlife area was established for flood control, wildlife and habitat management, and then recreational opportunities and educational opportunities for the public. So we're open sunrise to sunset. We have about 7.5 miles of auto tour. Some of that is reduced come wintertime just to create more sanctuary for wintering birds on the wildlife area. We have miles of hiking trails. We're open to hunting, waterfowl, pheasant, and dove, and fishing. And then we are primarily with the Yolo Basin Foundation, seeing over 4,000 students every year and 8,000 plus hunters per year as well. It was very interesting to see this year being here. I really enjoyed all the public use we got to see, from the wildlife observation, the hunting, the fishing. It was a very, very busy place, which was great to see the public out and enjoying the wildlife area. And again, so yeah, we partner with Yolo Basin Foundation, YBF mainly, responsible for the education and outreach for the wildlife area. So going into the habitat management, why do we manage habitats on these wildlife areas? And primarily we're managing for habitat for wildlife, for threatened and endangered species, and for the enjoyment of the public. That's why we do what we do and why we show up every day to this beautiful wildlife area. So just a list of the different habitat types that are on this wildlife area. And we could probably even get more cyclical in how we look at some of these habitat types, but generalizing it, this is really kind of the list that we're managing. We have our seasonal wetlands, our irrigated seasonal wetlands, and I'll kind of go into the difference between some of these and different management techniques on how we go about providing these different habitats. Permanent wetlands, summer wetlands, permanent sloughs, agricultural fields, rice and irrigated pasture, uplands, vernal pools, and then sometimes if we don't flood too late, we can actually plant some spring food plots for wildlife as well. So the big goal in habitat management in a largely flooded wildlife area or a wetland environment like this is that a lot of the system was fragmented. So we don't really have these natural systems that would flood in the fall and winter, dry out in the spring. A lot of those systems have been primarily cut off. So wildlife areas like YOLO, we have intensive management to recreate the seasonality of those wetland footprints. So everything that we're managing out here is intensively managed, and there's a fairly intensive process that goes along with that. So one of the primary things when we're looking at wetlands is water. So we need water to manage wetlands. That's a primary focal point of what we do. For this wildlife area, we have multiple different ways we're getting water, but primarily it's coming from lift stations, which are all tidally influenced. We have one lift station along Cuda Creek and a deep well, but primarily the majority of our water is coming from the tow drain, which is tidally influenced surface water that we then lift into our irrigation canals and deliver to different wetlands and agricultural fields through our delivery ditches and water control structures. We do have a couple deep wells on the property as well that we can run if we can't access the tow drain water. So the water management system, primarily it starts at the pump stations where we pump that water from the tow drain. That water is then goes through a discharge pipe, which goes into a conveyance canal, which is delivered to wetland management units. That water is then goes through a screw gate or a bored through structure, a water control structure, and then it goes into a wetland unit. This picture right here where it says swales. So once it gets into the wetland unit, it goes into swales and potholes, and that water is delivered throughout the wetland using those swales. And those swales in this system, we have our flood up system. And then when we go to draw down, which when we're draining in the spring, same idea, that water goes back into the swales, goes into an outlet structure, and then goes into a drain ditch. So we have our delivery ditches, our inlets, which bring the water into a unit, and then we draw it down through the swales back to a drain outlet and then through a drain ditch. So some things I'm going to talk about as we start talking about these wetlands are drawdowns, irrigations, and flood ups. So drawdowns, that's what we're doing right now. We're actually pulling boards, pulling water off of these wetlands to start moist soil germinations in these wetland units to promote food for migratory birds. And some of our wetlands, which are your irrigated wetlands, we're actually going to do managed irrigations during the late spring, early summer, all the way into late summer to promote additional moist soil vegetation for food for mig birds. And then our drawdowns, again, our flood ups are going to be in the fall, starting potentially all the way into mid-August and going, kicking up more into September, really kicking up into October, and then we'll finish up in November and December. And then that'll be it for our fall and winter flood ups, and then drawdowns start again. So first type of wetland is a seasonal wetland. So seasonal wetlands are wetlands that were primarily flooding up or drawing down mid-March to mid-May. The idea thing with drawdowns for these seasonal wetlands is to maintain moisture. We want soil moisture in these wetlands, so we don't want to just pull the boards out of the structures and dry these wetlands out. The idea is to do a slow stage drawdown where we're slowly pulling the water out of the wetlands, trying to maintain soil moisture to get good germinations of moist soil plants. These non-irrigated seasonal wetlands, our target is swamp timothy, which is a low-growing moist soil plant. Good swamp timothy, you may see 6 inches, 8 inches. Non-irrigated timothy, 2 to 4 inches primarily, but it's kind of looks like a putting green. And then when it dries out, it produces a little seed head on top. And then it also produces good vegetation and decomposes and produces really good invertebrates for when migratory birds are kind of switching their diets and looking for invertebrates. For vegetation management in these seasonal wetlands where we're targeting swamp timothy, we're doing a lot of mowing, primarily for noxious weed control. Cockleburr is a common one that we're seeing in these wetlands. Again, why we try to stair-step our drawdowns and maintain moisture, because it also delays the germination of those noxious weeds as well, and it allows us a little bit longer of a window to control some of that. So we're not having to try to mow cockleburr all prior to seed set at the same exact time. Disking is a great tool for us to be able to actually disturb soil. A lot of the seed for these different moist soil plants is sitting right there in the top 6 inches. So doing shallow diskings and timothy units, we can then irrigate or the next year when we draw it down, we can see improved germinations in those different plant types. The disking also disturbs the seed set for different noxious weeds that we really don't want. But the bang for our buck and what we're germinating from a moist soil plant standpoint is beneficial. We'll also use disking to control weeds as well. So joint grass, Bermuda grass, cockleburr, clovers, things like that, river bulrush are things that we'll actually use disking as a tool to control some of that, along with herbicide applications. So doing some herbicide spraying for targeted invasive or noxious weeds. For these seasonal wetlands, we're primarily going to be starting our flood ups around September 1st. We'll try to get some habitat out in mid-August. Our early migrants, northern pintail, shorebirds, we'll want to have some of that early habitat. We'll have our rice that'll be flooded as well, and we'll have some of our permanent and summer wetlands, but trying to get some seasonal wetlands on the earlier side to provide that fresh habitat for early migrants is very important. So we do have a very good relationship with Yolo Vector. So we work with them. You know, we do have issues putting a lot of water out early with mosquitoes. So we need to be able to manage some of that, but we will be trying to start some water around September 1st, where we can, to provide that early habitat. We'll really gear up the flood up for these types of wetlands in mid-September, and then again, probably even more so October 1st. So all of our flood up regimes are all planned and managed based on water availability. So because we're using lift stations on the tow drain, we're limited on the different wetlands that we can flood up. We can't flood everything up all at one time. We only have so much water that we can pump out of the tow drain. We only have so many conveyance canals and so many water control structures to move that water throughout the wildlife area. So it is a very targeted approach. We select the units based on locations, habitats, successes, food, all those different things on the ones we're going to flood up. And then a lot of these units, once we start flooding them up, they're gravity fed. So once we put water into a unit, it stair steps down to the next. So as that unit fills up, it'll go through the water control structures into the next unit, and so on and so forth. Around Yolo, primarily these seasonal wetlands, you're going to see big open water. We're really trying to manage for shallow flooded wetlands. That's the goal here. Most of our migratory birds that we're seeing in resident waterfowl are going to be more dabbling type ducks that are looking for shallow flooded wetlands, and shorebirds, wading birds as well are looking for those shallow edges. Dabbling ducks, we're really targeting, you know, that 4 to 8 inches of water. So most of our wetlands, we try to have good shallow edges. We'll have deeper water where the swales are, or lower ends of the pond. What's been very surprising at Yolo is the level of topography that we see in a lot of the wetlands. So most of the areas that were restored back to wetlands were in agriculture and row crops. So you have a lot of these high benches and low areas. So these big wetlands that may be 150 acres, you may have a lot of diversity in water depth across those wetlands. So you'll have a lot of that shallow edge around the higher ground, which will get deeper into the middle and towards the outlet. But there is a lot of diversity in these wetlands because of the size and because of the topography, which provides incredible habitat for a lot of different species of wildlife. So another kind of seasonal wetland is going to be an irrigated seasonal wetland. So irrigated seasonal wetlands, we're going to apply water at some point in the late spring or summer to germinate moist soil plants. Here, we're really targeting watergrass and swamp timothy. Both are going to be managed a little bit differently on how we irrigate. Typically, still, the drawdown is going to be starting, you know, mid-March, going into early May is when we'll start those drawdowns. Same idea as the seasonal wetlands, slow drawdowns, trying to germinate those moist soil plants. Irrigations, depending on the drawdown date, could start anywhere from mid to late May and go all the way through July. Depending on the flood up, we may even push some of those irrigations into late July or early August, depending on what we're seeing in the vegetation. Now, these irrigations, are going to be handled a little bit differently. So swamp timothy, if you inundate swamp timothy, cover it with water for too long, you'll end up killing it. So those are what we're doing is called more of a flash irrigation. It's going to be a really quick, fast, just get the pond bottom wet, pretty much give those plants a drink of water, and then pull the water right back into those swales. So having good delivery swales, good access to water, that's where you're going to see more of our irrigated wetlands. We can't turn the pumps on and run water through miles of ditches to irrigate wetlands. So primarily it's a targeted approach on wetlands that are close to a water source, have good delivery, have good intakes, good swales. We can get the water on, get the water off. And then deeper swales are great because we can leave those swales flooded when we draw down, so they're already charged. And then as soon as we want to irrigate, we can turn water into those units, bring it right out of the swale, flood the wetland bottom for a flash irrigation for timothy, and then pull it right back down into the swale. Now, watergrass is going to be a little bit different. You can do really well by flash irrigating. You just are going to have to do more irrigations. But watergrass, as long as you don't bring the water up over the top of the plant, it's 6 inches or so tall when you irrigate. You bring that water up with the vegetation and it'll grow with that water, and you can leave an irrigation on for watergrass for 2 weeks and it'll grow, 2 to 3 feet tall just during that irrigation, and then it'll continue to grow throughout the summer. So in the picture here with Chris, that's watergrass that's irrigated. So he's probably over 6 feet tall. So that's a really good stand of watergrass right there. And again, producing really good seed crops for migratory birds. So when they get down here, early migrants are looking for carbohydrates. So watergrass, swamp timothy are both providing a lot of carbohydrates through the seeds that they're producing. And then as we go later into the winter, these types of vegetation start to decompose and they start producing invertebrates. So as ducks or shorebirds start switching from grains or carbohydrates and start looking for invertebrates, this provides an incredible food source for them because of all the decomposing vegetation that's out there. Vegetation management, because we're applying water in the summer, it's going to encourage some of our problematic vegetation, joint grass, Bermuda grass, swales. If we keep them wet, you'll get a lot of cattail, river bulrush, things like that. So we do have to do a little bit more manipulation with equipment or herbicides. We can use water to control cocklebur, things like that. But by having the water on during the heat of the summer, it encourages cattails, river bulrush, joint grass, Bermuda grass, things like that to really take off. So in these irrigated seasonal wetlands, you're going to see a pretty heavy regime of disking. And disking is kind of a double-edged sword for us in the wetland management tool because we can control those noxious weeds by disking it and removing it. But by disking, we're also promoting native vegetation to want to grow. We're disturbing that soil, putting the good seed right on top. So when you see irrigated wetlands, you're going to see some type of a disking regime that's going to go on. For some of those noxious weeds like joint grass, it's a tough plant and it can take over a wetland and really reduce the amount of beneficial vegetation that we're trying to grow. So doing a targeted approach of a herbicide application and then letting it die and then coming back with equipment to disc it and turn those roots over and then letting them bake in the sun is a great way to control some of that. With our irrigated seasonal wetlands, we're going to do a lot of rotations. If you keep irrigating the same wetland year after year, you'll eventually start to lose the battle to some of those noxious weeds. So setting them back and holding them more into a seasonal regime for a year to take advantage of the drier conditions, we can get those back into really good shape and promote some more of that better wetland habitat for moist soil. Very similar to our seasonal wetlands, we're going to start our flood up around September 1st for these. So sometimes if we do an earlier flood up, we can actually use it as another irrigation. So if watergrass, for example, is still growing, it hasn't senesced, we can actually do an earlier flood up and keep growing that plant using a fall flood up. So if we do an earlier irrigation, we may want to do an earlier flood up to get that plant to maturity. So end result of a irrigated seasonal wetland, you're going to see something like this: water grass, lots of birds, really, really good habitat. All right, so permanent wetlands, Greens Lake would be a prime example of this. That's kind of more permanent, where we don't really draw it down, but it's deep enough to where it doesn't choke up full of cattail. But we also have other permanent wetlands where we keep in like a 1 to 3 year cycle. So those are going to be wetlands that we don't draw down or flood up. We just leave water on them. A lot of times we're going to let these wetlands and the vegetation tell us what we need to do. Once they start really losing a lot of their habitat value, they get covered up in primrose, the cattails come in, little to no open water. That'll signal to us that we need to draw those down. And then these units require heavy management when they are drawn down. So when they dry out, we have to spend a lot of time on these permanent wetlands to set them back, to control some of the problem vegetation, so that we can flood them back up and they can provide beneficial habitat for wildlife. So targeted, 1 to 3 years. If they stay in really good shape, we could leave them flooded for longer. If after a year they choke up full of vegetation, we'll draw them down and work them. Summer wetlands and permanent wetlands are providing crucial habitat in the summertime on a fairly dry landscape. So for our local breeding birds, for our residential wildlife, these wetlands are crucial. They produce a lot of invertebrates for ducklings, for young pheasants, for other hatched birds, deer, beavers, river otters, all sorts of different critters are going to be concentrated around where these permanent water sources are. So, the biggest issue from a management is just the issues with invasive and noxious weeds. If you spend some time on the wildlife area, or really any wetland type habitat in California, you've seen primrose and what it can do. It chokes up conveyance canals in these wetlands, and it's a really hard plant to control once it takes off. So we need to dry these wetlands out, and we'll use a combination of herbicide, fire, disking to control that vegetation, to get them back into good shape and productive. Fire is a great tool for permanent wetlands. What we can do is go out in February in airboats, and you can actually light off the cattail and the tule and burn a lot of that emergent vegetation down in February, called an overwater burn. And then as we dry off the wetland, we can get in there with our heavy equipment, disking mainly, and there's not as much vegetation there that's going to block the disc and reduce our ability to get a good deep disking. So burning off that kind of duff layer that's on top allows us to get those tractors in there and really get a control on some of those invasives. Primrose is one of those where you really don't want to disc it until it's either dead or completely dried and dead, because of disking, you're just going to spread that seed. So a lot of times when we dry down these permanent wetlands, we'll go out and try to do a herbicide treatment to kill some of the primrose, and then let it die and bake in the sun, and then come back with our tractors and do some heavy disking to control some of that vegetation. Fire is not as easy as a tool as it used to be. It's pretty difficult to get the air quality and the prescription to do these fires, and cattail especially will put off a really dark black plume of smoke, and can be fairly alarming. So that is something that we've talked with some of our partners, and even had going to have some conversations with CAL FIRE to just kind of evaluate our ability here at the wildlife area to see if we can do some prescribed burning, and use that as a management tool in February to set back some of these permanent wetlands. All right, so summer wetlands, again, going to be similar to a permanent wetland in the habitat type that it's providing on the wildlife area. The difference being that these aren't going to hold water for a whole year. So these are going to be units that will flood up later in the fall, and then we'll hold that water until mid-July all the way into mid-August to provide those summer wetlands, those crucial habitat types that are pretty rare out here in the summertime. These are units that are going to be rotational. So again, targeting units that are close to water, because we have to maintain water. Into these units, we're targeting at least 24 inches depth on these units, because if you keep the water a little bit deeper, it'll control the cattail growth. If you drop the water levels and they go to like mud flats and then you bring them back up, it encourages those cattails to take off and then they grow and you don't have any open water left. So keeping the water elevation deep is important. So you want wetlands that have good clay bottoms that can hold water, and then wetlands that are close to our lift stations and our delivery ditches so that we can keep good maintenance into those ponds. If you don't keep good flow through or maintenance water, so always having water coming in and always having water coming out, is you'll get really bad algae blooms because the water gets so stagnant. So we want to have good maintenance water that's coming in and going out. We want to try to maintain good water depths to control some of the emergent vegetation. We're going into a summer wetland. We know by having water in the summertime, we're going to have vegetation issues. We're going to have problems with primrose. We're going to have problems with cattails. So when we draw these down, and the drawdown dates are really going to determine by vegetation and then also wildlife use. So we'll get a lot of duck broods that'll utilize these summer wetlands. So, and also birds that are actually early migrants that'll come down and finish their molt here in the valley. They'll come into these summer wetlands, especially if there's good open water, and they'll molt. So if we're seeing a lot of bird use, molting or broods, we'll hold those until those birds are flight capable or until we've flooded up a seasonal wetland that's close enough where those birds can just jump over into the seasonal pond. So timing really is going to be based on vegetation and then what the wildlife use is. But again, gonna require heavy setbacks. Just in a matter of a week, we may be able to disc, mow, and knock out, hundreds of acres of seasonal wetlands, where a summer wetland or a permanent wetland, that may 130-acre unit may take 4 or 5 days just in equipment work to really get them back in the good shape. Then the other, more permanent water source you're going to see on the wildlife area, we have these permanent sloughs. So these are wetlands that we really don't have management capabilities. So we don't have structures to where we can drain them or, areas where we can manage the water that's coming in or going out. So we're classifying these as more unmanaged wetlands. So these are ones that are, if you go like at a parking lot A, between parking lot A and west to the levee, that would be an example of a permanent slough that we really don't have control over the water. So the only time you may is if you get into like severe drought and there's no water sources or nothing's draining into it and it dries out, you may be able to get in there to do some kind of work with equipment, but it's going to stay pretty wet. So they're difficult to maintain. These would be good ones to potentially do prescribed fire and just try to burn back some of the veg and maintain some open water. But difficult habitats to maintain, but providing very much needed habitat on the wildlife area in the summer. We have issues with azolla, primrose, things like that in these ponds. Cattails will take over. A lot of times you're going to see pretty good riparian habitat along these permanent sloughs just because of the hydrology. You're going to have wet conditions, which is going to encourage some of that growth. What's been really interesting for me being fairly new here is there is a lot of these, almost could call them like oxbows or old sloughs that, have some remnant footprint to them, maybe even some historical value. And it's really neat to see them. And they still play a role into our ability to manage habitat and really use a lot of these as conveyance ditches, ways that we can actually put water into them and potentially get water to another area, but never really going to be able to dry them out completely. So the other wetland component on the wildlife area is rice. So there's about 2,000 acres of rice on the wildlife area primarily. It's all on the north end. We'll maintain about 100 acres of shorebird habitat. So we'll purposely fallow about 100 acres, and we'll do summer water, summer irrigations in those rice fields for shorebirds in the summertime. And then depending on the flooding and the farmer's ability kind of determines how much rice they're actually going to plant on the wildlife area any given year. What we will see here in the bypass because of the flooding that we see is a lot of wild rice. You have your conventional rice, your white rice, and then you have wild rice. So wild rice is a shorter growing season. So when we have flooding years, it's tough to dry out the rice fields and get in there with equipment and seed and grow conventional rice. So a lot of times you'll see wild rice in the bypass. Again, we're a pretty dry landscape in the summer, so having 1,000+ acres of rice being grown, provide that wetland component. Duck brood, shorebirds, wading birds are going to love getting into these rice fields during the summer, feeding on invertebrates. And then once the crops are grown, dried out, and harvested, provides incredible wintering habitat. All the waste grain that's left behind after harvest provides great grain sources for early migrants. And then again, you have this decomposing vegetation producing invertebrates and providing that food resource for the birds as well. So you post-harvest, we'll flood them up, and I think everybody that's been to the wildlife area has seen the concentrations of birds that we get in those rice fields. Another component is our irrigated pasture. So we have approximately 1,800 acres of irrigated pasture or irrigatable pasture, kind of all on the south side of Fuda Creek, where we graze cattle. But the irrigated pasture provides really good forage habitat in the summer because they are irrigating it. So it produces invertebrates. So you'll see pheasants come out. You'll even see ducks, wading birds, Swainson hawks. We'll take advantage of those different habitat types during the summer. And then in the wintertime, you're going to get all the fresh green shoots of grass coming up in those pastures, which the snow geese, the white-fronted geese will take full advantage of and get out there and gorge themselves out with the fresh growth of grass coming up. Because these are seeing quite a bit of water in the summertime, again, they do require some manipulations. So that could be reseeding, disking. We'll start seeing different types of spike rush and Bermuda grass that will germinate out there. So coming back and disking them and reseeding them is a beneficial tool out there as well. So our vernal pools, primarily around the umbrella barn on the south end of the wildlife area. We have roughly around 1,500 acres. It's vernal pool, grassland habitat. Incredible wildflower blooms, very rare habitat type in the valley. So it's very important to protect it. Our management capabilities down in this area are primarily going to be cattle grazing. So by grazing cattle, we can keep the noxious weeds at bay and allow for the native plants, native grasses, native wildflowers to really not have as much competition in that landscape. So we do graze cows, but we do it later into the season. We won't start grazing down there until after June 1st. This is a picture that the environmental scientist was out there today and took this picture out at the umbrella barn. And then our upland habitats, primarily we do graze cattle in some of the uplands on the south end. Very important nesting habitat, sanctuary habitat for different ground nesting birds. Grazing is really kind of our typical management technique for these types of habitats. If we do see some major issues with pepperweed, star thistle, milk thistle, things like that, we may implement some herbicide applications to try to control some of that. Fire is another great tool doing fall winter burns in these areas. It takes away all that thatch and you get great vegetation growth in the spring. It's also a great tool of having the grazing lease on the property is that we're able to have cows go out. You probably up there over 6,000 acres of uplands throughout the wildlife area. And so by having cows out there able to reduce that thatch and control some of those invasives and get really good annual and native growth is very important. So some of the habitat management techniques that we're going to use on the wildlife area to manage all these different habitat types are going to be prescribed burning, mowing, disking, cattle grazing, and herbicide applications. So herbicide, again, it's a targeted approach. In these pictures, we're targeting primarily joint grass and Bermuda grass. Spray it, come back and disc it after it's done. It could be a great tool for controlling invasive and noxious weeds. Just needs to be done during the right conditions. Prescribed burning. So again, burning off big emergent vegetation stands in summer and permanent wetlands, doing upland burning to control invasive weeds and reduce thatch. So mowing, in the right-hand picture, mowing cocklebur could be a great tool, mowing prior to seed set. So you germinate some of those plants, and then if you go out and mow them prior to them setting seed, you can get good controls and management on those different noxious weeds. We'll use mowing islands and roads and levees for loafing habitat for birds. We'll use it to mow our roads, our hiking trails for public use access, and then also providing habitat for wildlife. Cattle grazing, irrigated pastures and uplands, primarily on the south end of the wildlife area. We have another grazing lease on the causeway. So under I-80 there, just north of parking lot A, there's about 500 acres up there. There's a grazing lease there, but primarily most of the grazing is going to be on the southern side of Poodle Creek. But a great tool for such a large wildlife area and such a large expanse of uplands. It'd be very difficult to do a fairly regular regime of mowing out there. And burning is a tough one to pull off these days. So having cows and having these leases, it really helps us control the thatch and the invasives and provide really good, healthy nesting habitat. And then disking, we're again controlling those noxious weeds, developing fire breaks. We're also disturbing that soil, creating those seed beds for different moist soil germinations. Some of the other equipment you're going to see on the wildlife area that we're going to be using: dozers, excavators we use quite frequently just for cleaning ditches, repairing water control structures and pipes, replacing those, doing major repairs after flood damage, dump trucks, backhoes. We also have a scraper that we use with our agricultural tractors. The idea there is doing some land leveling. If we have a lot of topography in some of these wetlands and we want it a little bit more level for water management, we can use scrapers to do that. Primarily, we're going to be using them more for swales, is cleaning out our swales and repairing our levees and roads. So we can pick up that dirt out of those swales. It'll acquire silt over years. So you can go in there and clean those swales out and again, be more efficient in how you move water. So all the habitat management that we're doing, the flood updates, the drawdown dates, identifying which units we're going to irrigate, which ones we're going to put in summer wetland, permanent wetlands. We sit down as a staff, February or March, and we go through the entire wildlife area and we talk about all the units and we develop a plan. Pretty much it's a plan of attack for the year, for the field season. We evaluate the wetlands. We talk about what's needed, what kind of implementations we're going to do during the summer, when we're going to draw units down, when we're going to flood them up, when we're going to irrigate, what roads need to be repaired, what facilities need to be fixed, what water control structures need to be replaced, what ditches need to get cleaned. So we'll develop this plan, and that'll be kind of our working guide throughout the field season. And so all of the staff around the wildlife area have a say in these conversations, and we have a discussion, and everybody knows kind of what our plan of attack is. In my experience working in wetlands and uplands and these types of habitats, you have to be flexible. So we will be flexible with our plan as things come up, as things arise. We will adapt to those different challenges, but it is a great way. It's a great foundation for us to be successful with such a large wildlife area and a pretty short staff or small staff here to do it all. So having some type of a plan of attack is very important. So the one thing that's really jumped out to me in kind of my first year was how all these different things, the habitat management, the flooding, the agriculture, the public kind of being more of an urban wildlife area, how it all works together and how it all works very well. And things are functioning very well. And it's very impressive to see the different interactions here at this wildlife area, and the good working relationships that this place has created. So that's one thing I've been very impressed with. So here's an old picture of just the bypass flooded. We didn't flood this severe this year. We did get levee to levee, but not for very long. So with that flooding comes road maintenance, and this was something I heard a lot even before the flooding. So I figured I'd talk about this real quick. Is we have about 10 miles from north to south, and a lot of public access roads that get beat up just from the public use, the amount of traffic we have, the agricultural, all the trucks and things like that in the summer. And so we are constantly working on roads. We're doing it right now, but there's kind of a balancing act for being able to do some of that road work. We need the proper moisture in the roads, and then we also need them not to be super wet and soaking. So during the winter time, we get a lot of calls asking, about the roads, when we're going to fix them. And so that's always kind of the common issue, is that either the roads are going to be too dry or too wet. It's that fine balance of when the conditions are appropriate for us to get out there and do the work. But we have been out there for over a week fixing flood damage and fixing the roads, grading them, disking them. And then we do have some gravel trucks coming in for some fresh gravel next week, which should help improve a lot of the roads on the north end. So just the habitat projects that we're going to be working on this year. So Ducks Unlimited has a NACA grant that they're going to be going to construction with in the Twin Lakes area. So primarily for this project, we're going to be rehabbing the delivery swales and potholes. We're going to be building up some levees and refurbishing those, and then cleaning some of the irrigation ditches or delivery ditches on the western side. So this is Twin Lakes. Everything in the red is where the project footprint is that they're going to be working on, and it's going to be pretty much redeveloping a lot of the swales and repairing a lot of these levees. And Ducks Unlimited has been a great partner. They've been doing a lot of work on the wildlife area, and been working with them ever since I got here. And so we do have, a lot of plans in the works to do future projects out in the wildlife area as well. But this will go to construction this summer. California Waterfowl also has a NACA grant that they're going to be going to construction with this summer. So 3 different projects, one in the Parker unit, one in the Mace unit, and one in Puda Creek. So the Parker unit project is going to be developing a summer wetland or a permanent wetland. So we're going to be deepening a lot of the swales so we can maintain higher water elevations, and then digging out some of the higher ground to create deeper pockets of water so we can sustain better summer and permanent wetland habitat. We're also going to be seeding it with native grass to create better nesting habitat around those permanent wetland sources. This should be a great project. The Mace unit is going to be cleaning out a seasonal wetland. We're going to be redoing the swales, cutting some of the higher ground here, and then we're going to be planting native grass and upland cover along the higher benches. And then up in this area, we're going to be converting all of this to a native grass restoration right here, and then also rebuilding some levees around it, and then building up some loping islands, and then adding some tule transplants out here as well. And then in Puda Creek, so this is part of the sanctuary here. So this project is going to be repairing some of our levees, and then also doing some wetland enhancement here, really cutting kind of the western edge here to show a larger wetland footprint to provide more habitat, and then cleaning out the delivery swales, adding some islands as well, and some tule transplants. California Waterfowl is also going to be working on our 70 lift pump, which is down in the Twin Lakes area. So we're going to be refurbishing that lift station to provide better water deliveries to those wetlands. So that'll incorporate the lift station being refurbished, re-leveling one of our delivery canals, changing up some of our water control structures, and then adding some water control structures as well. So the Yolo County or Yolo Resource Conservation District has also received some Wetland Conservation Board funding, and they're going to be doing some pollinator plots around the wildlife area. We have a couple locations around parking lot A and B that they're going to be doing, probably be doing more weed control this year and then planting next year. And they're also going to do some work around the headquarters building here at the office as well. All right. Porky, I will open it up for questions.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate all of your information. And we have had some questions coming in. So starting at the top here, given the cattail rhizomes, what is the regime strategy for disking?
So ideally, what we want to do is you want to dry it out and then disc it. So you'll come in with like a stubble disc, which is going to be very deep, so it can get down really deep. And you'll turn over those rhizomes, those root balls. And then you want them to bake in the sun. So drying out these permanent or summer wetlands is very important. So that's why we'll dry them out early in the spring. And then we'll go in there and disc, let them dry. A lot of times we may do 3 to 4 passes with the disc. So you'll stubble disc it, get those deep, heavy discs in there, and then you'll come back with finished discs, clean all that up, and then try to dry it out as long as you possibly can. So when we pull one out of permanent or summer water, we'll pull it down early spring, dry it out, and we probably won't flood it back up until after Thanksgiving. So by drying out those wetlands, you're killing a lot of those rhizomes, and the heavy disking is very helpful.
For fishing, what species occur in the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area?
I'd say probably stripers. Striped bass are the most common one that people are after, but catfish, carp. I haven't been here really during a summer season, so I haven't exactly seen everything they're taking out, but I have had a lot of calls about stripers, carp, and catfish.
Great. And where do you post employment opportunities for the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area?
So that'll come out through the State Department website. So we don't have a site to post like locally here for Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. So that'll come through the CDF account when those jobs will be posted. What I would say, if people are interested in employment opportunities at the wildlife area, I would encourage them to get in contact with me and express your interest. So that way, when those opportunities do come out, I can send those opportunities to people.
And do you have maps of the habitat types?
You know, I don't know if we have habitat type maps out publicly, but I can research that. They change a lot, so keeping up with them can be difficult, but I know we have some resources through our headquarters office that assists us in doing some of that mapping for our management. So there is ways to get them if people are interested.
Great. Got a nice compliment here. Ken says, I appreciate the effort and cost, example, gravel, for the road maintenance. I thank you and the staff. I am awed by the complexity of the management of water. So, another question here. Oh, they're rolling in. How many different species of birds nest on the property?
Well, I wouldn't be able to provide a correct answer for that one. I don't know. A lot. But again, if we get contact information, that is something I could look up and find the answer for you, or at least something better than what I have for you right now. But multiple different species of ground nesting birds, waterfowl, raptors, all different types.
Any thoughts on enhancing salmon access to water upstream of the Los Rios Dam?
So there is some funding that Solano County Water Agency did receive. So the idea is to try to implement a bypass channel around parking lot G, around the check dam there, to allow salmon to get through around the check dam even when the boards are in. So yes, there is some work to get fish up through the creek.
You mentioned concerns about invasive plants. Do you have to manage invasive animals as well?
Say if we have invasive animals that are a problem for other species or for habitats, feral pigs would probably be an example of something like that. We would manage them, but invasive plants are the target. We really, at this point, since I've been here, we don't have any major issues with invasive animals.
We did have one of our participants posted a link to the calcareers.ca.gov, so that could be helpful. When thinking about the next few years, what do you see as the biggest management challenge for the YBWA?
I think there's a lot of unknowns. We have the Big Notch project that's going to be coming, which is going to potentially have impacts from a flooding standpoint and what that's going to do to the management of the wildlife area. We really don't know exactly what those impacts may be. We are working with DWR and our partners to try to find ways to mitigate some of that. Some of my major concerns, since I've stepped in here is probably really more around our staffing. We're very thin on our staffing, and that makes it very complicated to manage the wildlife area the way it needs to be managed. So some of the unknowns with some of the projects and things going on in the bypass concern me. And then also just having the staff and people, trained up to have the knowledge and experience to do the complicated work that we're doing out here is also a concern.
When, in your opinion, is the best time to visit the wildlife area?
I've always thought, in past places I've worked, I've always kind of told people to target right around Thanksgiving. I think we're kind of at peak bird numbers. I mean, there's a lot of things that come into play there, temperatures, what the winter's doing, but that usually that late November timeframe into early December can be a great time to be here. Large concentrations of birds, ducks, geese, shorebirds, all different types of species. So that's what I would target it.
So I got to throw in my own twist. My favorite is the summer, especially late summer when the rice is at full, like September maybe. It's hot, but the birds and the rice I find fascinating. And then, of course, the bats are there and personal passion.
Yeah, I guess it really depends on what you're after too.
Exactly.
If you want to see thousands and thousands of migratory birds, yeah, I'd target late November, early December.
Yep.
Unique species of wildlife, summertime, kind of our local wildlife, trying to take some of the hiking trails where we have summer water or permanent water, can be really amazing, but it's hot, dry out there. So that makes it tough.
True. Very true. How does bypass flooding affect pheasant nesting?
So what I've seen, we have some high ground. So what I saw this year when it flooded is like a mass migration. All the pheasants that were more on the eastern side of the wildlife area, we started seeing a lot more pheasants working their way to the west. So they'll go up into the Parker area where it's a little bit higher, don't have as much floodwater inundation. From there, they'll actually push up over the levee. We have a couple areas outside the levee. They'll go into those areas, but they're moving to the high ground. From a nesting standpoint, what happens, it depends on the flood. A year like this, a lot of the uplands look really good. The water didn't stay on them super long, so there's going to be really good cover. And so the pheasants, as the floodwaters recede, they'll trickle back into the larger wildlife area, and the nesting conditions are going to be pretty good. A year like last year, you potentially have more issues because you have floodwaters that sit late into April or even into May, which makes it really difficult for a lot of the hens to set up. So you're going to get more late nesting attempts. And if it gets really hot, last year, luckily it wasn't that hot. So you actually had better late nesting success. So potentially the late spring and early summer, if it gets really, really hot, the success of those late nesting attempts go down. So it really just is going to depend on the flooding and how severe it is.
Are there opportunities for hunters to participate in cleanup efforts before the season starts and dates?
Yes, so we are going to do a cleanup day on August 31st. That's the only date I have set right now. We also are going to be trying to do some more targeted work days on the wildlife area this summer. And so if you are interested in volunteering for some more of those targeted work days, I would encourage you to get in contact with us, or write an email or get a hold of me. And so I have your name, number, email, and we can reach out when we do that. So right now we're collecting kind of those names and emails so we can reach out to folks when we set dates. But August 31st is the one day we have on the calendar right now.
So sometimes Yolo Basin Foundation has cleanup days as well, depending on what kind of cleanup they're interested in doing. Josh would like to have your email address.
Okay. Corky, do you mind writing that in the chat?
I think I can do that. Right? Garrett Spaan at wildlife.ca.gov.
Correct.
All right, we'll give it another couple moments here. See if anybody else comes up with more questions for us. Covered a lot tonight, Garrett.
I know I tried to catch myself. I didn't want to go too crazy, but I could talk about these things for hours. So and I'll say that too, if people want more information, feel free to shoot me an email. Come visit us at the wildlife area, shoot me a call. If you want more detail on some of these things, more than happy to discuss it.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate your work. We appreciate the partnership with the department and the Yolo Basin Foundation. And it's great to have you on board. I'm also personally really excited that you do have a background in education in addition to wildlife area management and water and all. So that's been great. You did get another comment here. Thank you so much for the information, Garrett. Keep up the amazing work, and shout out to the YBF team. So thanks for joining us this evening. I hope we see everybody at California Duck Days right around the corner. And come on out. The wildlife area will soon be open. Yolo Basin Foundation will post the date when we have it for opening, both on our website and on our social media. So keep in touch, and hopefully we'll see you out there in the wildlife area. Thanks for joining us. Got several thank yous coming in there, Garrett.
Right on. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Absolutely.
Hopefully I didn't go too long.
No, that was perfect. Look at that.
I was trying to watch the clock, and I boogied through some of the equipment stuff that I thought it was getting a little long, but
Maybe we'll see some of that equipment sitting around when people are here for Duck Days.
you will. We'll probably have the grader back there for that. I think all the mowing tractors and ag tractors are going to be out at the levee pad, but probably bring the grader back in and have that there, and the backhoe too.
People like to look at that kind of stuff. It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to close this out. Have a great evening. I'll
All right.
see you next week, Garrett.
See you next week.